Humanists International, based in London, I believe, right? Based in London.
Yes, that's right.
And he does a lot of really remarkable work on human rights issues related to people of no religion around the world. He's going to tell us about that. Very different from, I guess, what our humanist organization does here. It's a very specialized work that he's doing. And I think mostly for our U.S. audience, you know, I guess it's sort of characteristic of Americans. We're a little obsessed with ourselves, you know, not tuned into what's going on in the rest of the world sometimes. So we're really excited to have you to tell us a little bit about what Humanists International is doing and just sort of the I guess the non-religious and sort of political persecution that's happening. So I for one, I'm really for everything you have to say. So just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Pleased to be here to speak to you guys today. And yeah, I guess I'll just explain a little bit about myself and my background, and then I've got about 10 or 15 slides to go through for some updates on things that we're working on. So my name's Gary. I've been the Chief Executive of Humanists International since 2017. Before I worked at Humanists International, I worked at the Humanist Society Scotland, which is the national organisation for humanists and sort of non-religious ethical people in Scotland. And yeah, so I've kind of been around the humanist world for a while, an organised non-religious community. Humanists International is an international NGO actually based in the US. So we're a US charity, 501c3. We were set up in 1952, basically on the aftermath of the Second World War. A bunch of humanist organizations, including the American Humanist Association and the American Ethical Union, got together and decided to set up an organization which could represent the views and the ethics and the interests of the organized non-religious movement, the humanist, atheist, skeptic, laik, freethinker, rationalist community around the world, and represent them at places like the United Nations, the Council of Organization of American States, and the national forums, and also part of the job of our organization was to help between different national organizations. And so what we actually do is we convene every year a General Assembly of the national organizations. So in the US, it would include a number of regional state level organizations, but also our three main members would be the American Humanist Association, American Ethical Union, and American Atheists. And we these global meetings really to talk about what the issues are of importance to our movement. You know, issues in the past spoke about US foreign policy when it comes to belief, and a number of other issues. So that's kind of over the past 10 years, the organization has expanded. We hired some more staff, and we've kind of branched into doing more campaign work, trying to do research and publish materials on issues which are important to the humanist community, and to also try and support and increasingly support our members in poorer parts of the world. So the way it kind of works is members in richer parts of the world, which is Europe and North America really, they pay a fee. Well, actually everybody pays the same, which is about 1% of their income. But for larger organizations, that is obviously a much more significant amount of money. And we redistribute this money through different grants to other parts of the world. So I think last year, 2019, we must have distributed over $100,000, probably close to $150,000 to $200,000 to atheist, humanist, secular organizations in Latin America, Asia, Africa, you know, many places where there are new organizations which are struggling to establish themselves. So in brief summary, that's kind of what we do as an organization. So we don't have much of a presence nationally. So you probably, if you're an individual member in the US or anywhere, you probably have heard about us. But what we try and do is to kind of work behind the scenes to support national organizations to have more research, more information, more ideas of campaigns, and so on, specifically when it comes to international issues. So what I would like to talk about today is the increasing amount of work that we are doing to support humanists at risk, or to support non-religious people at risk, but to support humanists at risk, and specifically also to talk about the case of Mubarak Bala, who is a humanist who has been detained in Nigeria since March this year. And yeah, we'd just like to take some time to give you an update on what's happening with his case, and also to highlight some other cases which we're working on, and talk a little bit about the research that we're trying to do into non-religious people as a community around the world, and how they are often abused and persecuted and targeted, and yes, what we can do to try and support that. So let me start off by sharing my presentation with you, which I should be able to do. Okay, so I think everybody can see my presentation, hopefully.
Yeah, brilliant. It looks great. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, so this is the kind of four things that I would like to sort of touch upon, as I said earlier. So yeah, I guess most people who are watching this presentation will have heard of Mubarak Bala. Mubarak Bala, as it says here, is a 35-year-old guy from Nigeria. He is the president of the Humanist Association of Nigeria, and he has a very active following on Twitter and Facebook, and many people around the world have interacted with him on. So I suspect that of the people watching this, there might be a great many people of you who knew Mubarak through his online campaigning, and certainly probably most of you have heard, if you didn't know him already, you would have heard about him in the last couple of months. The background to what's going on at the moment is that Mubarak in 2014 was detained in a psychiatric facility on account of being an atheist. This was really at the request of his family. His father was a very conservative religious figure in Nigeria. And this is obviously a horrendous breach of the rule of law, and all the principles of justice. So when he was detained back in 2014, Humanists International and other organisations led an international campaign to raise awareness of his situation, and we had, there was articles published by some very reputable international news to share his situation and an outrageous miscarriage of justice which happened to him. So great, thankfully, toward the end of 2014, he released. Humanists International and our members around the world did a small fundraiser to raise some money to help him get set up for his studies, and to try and get his life back in order. For those of you that have interacted with Mubarak, you'll know that he is an incredibly brave person. Nigeria is not an easy place, as many places around the world are. It's not an easy place to be openly non-religious, but nonetheless, he wanted to live the spirit, the action of his beliefs, and criticize, the intolerant religious rhetoric from many parts of his country, and to express his criticism of the religion that he was brought up in, the religion that he was kind of forced into as a child. So a very brave person. This is a photograph of Mubarak from when he was detained back in 2014. So really, the story from 2014 is a real horror show of what can happen. This is a slightly more up-to-date photograph of Mubarak, who's the gentleman on the right-hand side of the photo. I don't actually know who the guy is on the left, but the person in the middle is Rosalind Mould, who is the former president of the Humanist Association of Ghana, and also a board member at Humanists International. And this was them speaking on a panel at a conference in Kenya and East Africa back in 2017. So this is Africa, obviously, in Nigeria. This is Kaduna, where Mubarak was originally detained by plainclothes police detectives without a warrant. And although the situation has evolved, obviously, since he was detained back in March, there is still very little clarity on what his legal status is. We know he's been detained by the police very after taken north to this place called Kano. Kano is in part of the northern eastern part of Nigeria, which is very heavily influenced by Boko Haram and very extreme elements of conservative Islamist organizations. So one of the first things we tried to get out was a call to make sure that he could be taken somewhere more fair, where he'd be likely to stand a fair chance of accessing justice. The situation, again, like I said, is still not very clear, but we believe that Mubarak was detained at the behest of a law firm who pressed a complaint to the authorities in Kano that Mubarak had breached several laws, including a cybercrimes law, which makes it illegal to target people on the basis of their religion and to criticize their religion. Those of you that were friends with Mubarak will know that he was very open about his criticisms and skeptical thoughts about religion on social media, and that I think these criticisms, these sometimes very effective and hard-hitting criticisms, obviously were not received well by many people in Nigeria. Of course, that is not in any way to say that his right to express those opinions should be stifled, but nonetheless, these complaints were made. We believe that he is still in the process of going through the judicial system, but we have still not been able to get access for his legal team to actually meet with Mubarak. So we've been doing a lot of lobbying behind the scenes to try and establish what his legal situation is, what his physical situation is. There are some reports, which I'll come on to in a little minute, that he's been moved back to Kaduna, but these are still unconfirmed at the moment. So the situation is pretty grave. We believe that he's still being held without being formally arraigned and charged with any crime whatsoever, without access to his lawyer. So it's a pretty desperate situation. I want to introduce somebody at this point again who many of you watching this will probably have heard of or may even be in touch with. This is a gentleman on the right who's Dr. Leo Igwe. Dr. Igwe is seen by many as the sort of founding father of humanism in Nigeria, an incredible man. He's led campaigns against witchcraft accusations across Africa. He's actually just completed, I think, last year or the year before, his PhD thesis into witchcraft accusations in Africa. And in this photograph here, he's receiving the Distinguished Services to Humanism Award in 2017 from our General Assembly, Humanists International General Assembly. He was a former representative of Humanists International to the African Commission, which is the sort of African version of the United Nations human rights body, sort of. And he's also, worked for us as West African representative at Humanists International. So an incredible guy. He himself has also been the recipient of many targeted attacks in Nigeria. He was detained in 2009, 2010 because of his, humanist campaign work. But nonetheless continues to work and campaign across Nigeria to call out harmful traditional practices such as witchcraft. And has been very much leading the campaign to free Mubarak on the ground in Nigeria. He's been working tirelessly, and I think, for days, it seems to be without sleep. He seems to be active, almost 24/7, to try and really just be the bridge between the governments that we're with, the international association, to try and make sure that we're getting up to date information. He's also clear updates about what's happening with Mubarak. So he's been, as he was in 2014, when Mubarak was detained, he's been an absolutely crucial part to make sure that we can help get Mubarak the support that he needs. So in terms of, if I zoom out a little bit and think about the abstract process of supporting humanists at risk, people like Mubarak and also others, and I'll come back to Mubarak in just a minute, but really this is an area of work that Humanists International is putting more and more resources into. So this year, 2020, we've actually hired a full-time member of staff, a Humanists at Risk coordinator, who is the only person in the world that is working full time to assess and coordinate the cases that we receive, sometimes on a daily basis, for the violence against non-religious people. So the process that we follow broadly is, first of all, we try to establish the facts and clarify the details. So with many cases like this, where someone has been essentially abducted or taken without much notice, establishing the details is very difficult. We will get a number of different reports, sometimes from social media sources, sometimes from phone calls, WhatsApp groups, etc. And taking the time, although it is a time critical issue, but taking the time to really establish what has happened. Very often in cases like this, people can get understandably and justifiably excited, and it can lead to some miscommunication about the exact details of what's happened. So the step is that we convene a sort of conference of the parties to try and establish what exactly has happened in as much detail as possible. The second step is that we always get consent to act on someone's behalf. One of the interesting things is that, I'll talk later, we have on the caseload went somewhere around 60 people that we will be assessing and supporting in various ways. Now, for many of those people, for us to publish their name in connection with our organizations and, being a member of the religious community, actually put them in harm. And so for many of the cases that we receive, it's crucial that actually we keep it totally confidential. In other cases, such as Mubarak, some of the best things that we can do is get as much publicity as possible to shine a light on Mubarak's situation, also to show to the authorities in Nigeria that we're watching, and then we will not let them simply do something horrible with Mubarak without us noticing, and we are keeping a close eye on them. But that judgment call is a difficult one, and not to be too dramatic, but it can sometimes be a difference between life and death for some people. So we require the consent either of the individual who is affected, or of their lawyer, their family, close friends, etc. We really try to get the consent of whoever is best placed to let us know the wishes and the interests of the person who we're trying to support. So that's a very crucial thing. The third step is to get together a briefing for relevant. Now, the relevant will often be confidential diplomatic sources. So, for example, in the case of Mubarak, within 3 days of his we had a briefing which was, read by ambassadors in over 17 countries. So we managed to use the context that we've nurtured over many years to get these this information to the top of the desk of the people who really need to see it. I can't go into too much details about our diplomatic contacts and interventions, because by its nature it's a confidential process, and many governments who will intervene and, for example, phone the Nigerian foreign minister or make representations to the Nigerian embassy in their country, they can only do that if they have the confidential space to do that, because, as I'm sure you know, that states around the world have many interests, and financial and business interests and so on, and so it's really crucial that we respect the diplomatic process. Often a very frustrating process, both for us and also for our members and others, because we wish we could be sending public updates every day on what's happening with our cases, because very often there is daily activity happening, but that would jeopardize our relationship with these diplomatic contacts, which will be essential for the help we're going to provide in the future. But it also would probably mean that people are less likely to intervene and to help us. So that's frustration. But in some cases with large members, such as the members I mentioned earlier, they, for example, the American Association and American Atheists have contacts with Congress, with the State Department in the US, and it's thanks to the reputation that we've built up with those people, but also the reputation that American Humanist Association and American Atheists has with those national authorities, that we can actually get to, you know, the ambassadors or to the desk officers that can make a difference in these cases. So yes, so that I guess comes on to step 4, which is coordination with members. So for some of our members, they'll be able to pick up the phone and get on to, you know, a congressman or a senator or a you know, representative at the State Department, and to get that direct connection. For other members who are not maybe as politically engaged with their governments, they can write letters, they can write to the embassies, they can sign petitions. But really what we want to do is to flood as much activity as possible, and to highlight, in this case with Mubarak, to highlight publicly as much as possible what has been happening in Nigeria, to make sure that people can see what's going on. And like I said, step 5, that's really just the process of ongoing communication. So in many cases, this is confidential communication between us and, for example, international associations, other NGOs such as Amnesty International, but also with our members and with national governments. And it just kind of goes round and round and round, and we're constantly trying to make sure that we have the up-to-date information, that we're putting the right people in touch so that they can take the action that they need. So as I mentioned, this is an example of a briefing document that we put together, and this is really the kind of primary way we try to share information with our members, the interested public, but also with government and international organizations. And of course, for us, it's essential that this information is accurate, that we keep it up to date, and that it's authoritative. You know, we Humanists International has worked, you know, for many decades to establish and to protect its reputation as an authoritative voice on these issues, and also a trusted partner, someone that organizations can work with confidentially or publicly, etc., and know that, you know, we will act in the correct way. So for us, these you know, these are really important things to get right, and not to, as it can often be, and there comes to be a lot of pressure to rush into things and get things out as soon as possible. And yes, time is of the essence, but it's more important to be accurate than to be fast, in my view. These, just thinking about the international response in terms of diplomatic efforts and so on. So these are obviously a few examples of the public output from our diplomatic connections. So you'll see on the top left-hand side there, this is Ambassador Sam Brownback, who's the US Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He sent out a tweet to highlight Mubarak's case, which was actually quite a surprising intervention. We didn't expect Ambassador Brownback to make a public intervention. I also do want to just take a short moment to note that we are aware of Ambassador Brownback and his reputation in the United States. Our policy when it comes to working with politicians or in this case officials at the State Department is that we will work with anybody who has a mandate or an office that can lend support to our efforts. And in this case, Ambassador Brownback, at least in an international context, has always been very happy to highlight the persecution of humanists and non-religious people as part of the US's international religious freedom strategy. However, I am aware that many of our members in the US are very critical of his views sort of domestically. So I just want to note that we are aware of the controversial nature of Ambassador Brownback, but nonetheless, we think that his intervention here is very helpful, and we continue to maintain diplomatic relations with that office. The one on the bottom left is a guy called Joss Doom, who's sort of Ambassador Brownback's representative, if you like, in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a country which is very interested in and progressive on the issue of freedom of religion or belief. In the US, we tend to talk about international religious freedom. In most of the rest of the world, the policy that we talk about is called freedom of religion or belief, FORB for short, FORB. And so that's a bit of a side note, but we would like to see the US adopt that international naming structure of freedom of religion or belief. Belief in this case denoting any other type of belief, religious or non-religious. So humanism and atheism would be included there. But that's a side note. And then on the right-hand side here, you can see the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has also issued a public notice calling for the release of Mubarak, which again was surprising and very, very welcome intervention from the US. Final update I have here, public update to share with you is a written question and answer. This is actually I won't obviously read it out, but it's a written question from Jim Shannon, a member of Parliament in the UK, and the answer is by James Durbridge, who is a Minister for Africa in the UK government. And basically, this just shows the I think, especially from the UK side, the close collaboration that has been going on between our member organisations, in this case Humanists UK, and their national government and Foreign Office to raise awareness of Mubarak's situation and to help to clarify his legal status. Should say, it says here, it clarifies in this answer from the UK government that he's been charged with insulting contempt of religious creed, etc. We're still not entirely sure if that's been verified by authorities in Nigeria. There seems to be some difficulty in clarifying the exact legal charges and which jurisdiction is going to be responsible for, litigating on Mubarak's case. One thing I can share today actually is that tomorrow, which is 17th of June, is going to be a day that the legal team in Nigeria will launch in the courts in Nigeria fundamental rights petition, which is essentially a legal action to ask the courts in Nigeria to intervene to help Mubarak uphold his access to lawyers, habeas corpus rights essentially, and his fundamental and human rights. So we're hoping that that will help us to get access to the lawyer, to check on his physical state and his legal status. And as the news comes through, we'll try and share it with our networks as fast as we can. Some of you may have seen this image here, which came from a campaign which was actually started by an organization called Atheists United in Los Angeles. So this is a regional organization in Los Angeles who got in touch with us to offer help. They wanted to get involved in helping us to engage with grassroots people and people across the US for them to take some action. This was a campaign that they put together with their support, which I'm very, very grateful for, which encouraged people to take some action in terms of signing petitions, making donations, tweeting to different authorities in Nigeria. And this was a big learning curve for us actually, because as I've probably indicated, most of our engagement is behind the scenes with diplomatic channels, or sort of behind the scenes but with our members, and we've not really done much in the way before of engagement with general public, social media, etc. And I think that partly due to how popular and how much of a following Mubarak has, and also I think just to do with the complete incredulity people had at him being detained again by the authorities, there was a big appetite to get involved and for people to show their solidarity and their support. So it's been quite a process to see. Before I move on to talk about other cases, then just to sort of recap on the situation for Mubarak, the situation is bleak. We believe that Mubarak is in the legal system, but he still has not had access to his lawyer. We have not been able to verify his physical well-being and exactly where he's being held. There's also concerns with COVID-19 and is he being held in sufficiently good surroundings that he's going to be protected and kept healthy. And we will continue to work with the lawyers on the ground. We will continue to coordinate the international elements of the campaign, including with the authorities at the US State Department, and we will continue to provide as many updates publicly as we can. At the moment, we're usually publishing about one update per week on our website, but I know that people are feeling frustrated, and we share your frustrations that things are not moving quickly enough. But I guess I just want to reassure you that I've been following the case, that we take it extremely seriously, that we have at least one member of staff who is monitoring this case every single day. We have, the rest of the team are obviously involved in that as well. So we're doing absolutely everything we can to try and help Mubarak. And as soon as we know more that we can share, we will certainly do so. So to maybe talk a little bit more about some other cases, just as an example of the types of situations that we deal with, and also the types of discrimination and persecution that humanists around the world can face. I'm going to give you an example of 4 other briefings here. I'm not going to talk about them in detail. You can find more information on our website if you would like to read more, but this is just an overview. So this is Sohail Arabi. He is a blogger from Iran, who's been detained since 2013 for allegedly insulting the Prophet Muhammad in a blog post. He was originally sentenced for blasphemy, but that commuted to life imprisonment. But we continue to campaign to raise awareness of his case and to ultimately get him released as soon as possible. On the left here is Professor Mahmoud, who is a Somali professor of humanities, who has been basically forced into hiding. He was targeted for his liberal critique of some conservative fundamentalist religious groups in Somalia, and this led to a collection of extremist preachers basically denouncing him and calling for him to be murdered, and him and his family have had hiding, and we're providing support to him and his family to essentially keep somewhere safe, where it's obviously a secret location where they can keep safe. But ultimately we will try to help him put together his life some way and try and move on and hopefully find somewhere safe to live. Final 2 cases on the right hand side here, you can see Dr. Ahmed Jalali. This is a professor who's connected with the Free University in Brussels, who was traveling to the University of Tehran to carry out research. He was charged with espionage, essentially, which was that I believe because of his connection to the free thinking university there. So a completely bogus charge of spying, which we have been campaigning along with Amnesty International in Belgium and the Demens Nu, which is the Flemish humanist organisation in Belgium. And on the left-hand side here is Professor Mohammed Ismail, who you may know is the father of a woman called Gulay Ismail, who is also detained and persecuted in Pakistan for her humanist beliefs last year, but since has managed to make her way to safety, actually in the United States, where she is now claiming asylum in New York, which is very welcome. But her father continues to receive basically harassment and ongoing persecution from the authorities in Pakistan, partly for his connection to Gulay, a very famous humanist, and also for his liberal human rights, pro-human rights approaches. So it's that's a small sort of snapshot of some of the cases that we will deal with. This slide here shows you the number of requests that we have received so far in 2020. So you can see in January just under 10, February a little bit less, etc., etc. So I checked just before I came online here, and we had, I think, 61 cases which we have received since the start of the year, and that's a lot. If you think about, obviously every individual is different, the support they require is different, and the level of urgency and severity is different, but to have 61 of our friends and colleagues, 61 people who share the same moral views as you and me, who are engaged in the same activities as me, to have 61 of them around the world who are in life-threatening situations and asking for our help, it's a really stark position for us to be in. I don't know if that's clear enough on the screen, but this is a heat map basically showing the clustering of where these cases are referred from. The largest one will come as no surprise to people. That's Pakistan, where we receive a high number of requests for support from. The There is actually quite an active underground humanist community in Pakistan, which we're in touch with, supported well by a number of what do you call that, diaspora in Europe and North America. But yes, I can, if you want to know the figures, I can share them with you later. But yeah, that's the kind of origin of where most of the cases come from. Of the cases, the 61 cases we have received, or requests, I should say, we've received in 2020, this is a breakdown of what the main type of support people are looking for. So you can see that about a third of people who get in touch with us are looking for help with relocation. Also, one of the most difficult things for us to help with. In many cases, people want to move themselves and or their family out of wherever they happen to be into somewhere where they can live more openly as a humanist person. Which is, of course, completely understandable. Similar as well to the segment at the bottom, asylum and UNHCR is the High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the UN body which will assess and can ultimately, although rarely, can ultimately intervene and help relocate a person from somewhere to another place. We provide a lot of financial support. We provide thousands and thousands of dollars every year to people who need help to flee the country, to flee a location, to go into hiding, etc. In many cases, people are looking for advice, also solidarity, and to raise awareness of their situation. We do provide access to legal services through obviously specialists and so on, and we can give a limited amount of advice and guidance, but we do not have lawyers on staff that can give advice. And of course, international law, especially when it relates to asylum and refugee, is a very complex area that we would want to get expert advice from ourselves. So that's the type of support that people ask for. In terms of Humanists International, and this is basically the size of our team. We have 7 members of staff. There's 8 in this diagram, but we actually haven't recruited for one of these positions yet. But basically, we have 7 members of staff, and the human risk is the person who, as you would think, coordinates this work and helps to manage our response, all the different members of staff, as what we can do to help support these individual cases. I mentioned at the beginning that part of what we do is provide research and expertise on international issues for our members, but also for other researchers, politicians, UN officials, etc. Some of you will be familiar with our main publication, which is the Freedom of Thought Report, which I actually have a copy of with me here, which is available for free online. Just Google Freedom of Thought Report. Basically, this is a report we've compiled every year since 2012. The original one actually was supported by the State Department. So the original report, which I think only had 100 countries out of the around 200 in the world, and that report was funded by the State Department, by a grant from the State Department. But we've taken it in-house since. Basically, we publish an entry, like a wiki, for every single country in the world, and we analyze the treatment and the situation for humanists and other non-religious people in terms of access to justice, education, and wider social problems. And we provide a ranking on best to worst, essentially, of the countries in the world. And yeah, that's a very well received report. It's often cited by UN officials, by national authorities, etc. So, but something we've been working on, as I said, with a greater and greater focus on humanist at risk, is actually a new report, which we're going to call the Humanist at Risk Action Report. We're in the final stages of editing that report, and it's going to be published on the 25th of June. So keep your eyes on our website if you would like to read that, sign up for our emails, etc. But that report, which I will tell you a little bit about, I guess I don't think I've got any slides on it, is essentially going to be focusing on 8 countries. This was funded by the UK Foreign Office. We're going to be focusing at 8 countries. And whereas the Freedom of Thought report focuses on law and policy and things we can measure, the Humanist at Risk report will focus more on what is the experience and what is the lived experience and the testimony of individual humanists in 8 countries where humanists are very often persecuted. Nigeria will be one of the countries that we will investigate. So to zoom out a little bit here and sort of start to conclude this little presentation. In terms of the key challenges ahead for humanists at risk and also for the work that we're trying to support, I think one of the things is going to be increasing the visibility of humanists at risk. We go to a lot of meetings with aid donors, USAID and other people like that. And it's very well understood that religious organizations and religious minorities are either aid donors themselves or the target of discrimination. Now, nothing that I say here should be taken as diminishing the discrimination that religious groups such as Christians, Yazidis, Muslims, etc. face. The discrimination they face is awful, and it's very, very right that governments and authorities publicize it and that NGOs campaign on that. When we're asked to show solidarity, we will, do that. But it's also the case that there exists every place in the world, unreligious communities like ours, and that those individuals are persecuted. And it's not a competition about who's persecuted most, but the fact that humanists are a persecuted group is simply not acknowledged by many governments, by many aid agencies. And part of what we're doing by publishing this research is to try and get people, not just within our community, but within the aid world, within the international, sociologists and researchers, to get them to start to understand that there is a community out there who's being persecuted, and that we don't think that as a kind of global community that we are aware of that enough. Effective coordination. So like I said, we have our members and our contacts that we're trying to effectively coordinate to make sure that we can have as much impact on helping these individuals as possible. And as I said, more research and understanding of humanists as a protected category. So we've done this research, but we're not a university, we're not a think tank. We're an NGO, a campaigning NGO, which does the best research we can do. Part of we publish free and open source is that ideally we want someone to take it and do a better job and to help us increase the level of awareness. In terms of getting involved in some of the stuff I've mentioned, or getting involved in humanism and secular campaigning, etc., the old cliche, which is true, is think global, act local. So for most individuals, there isn't really an easy way to get involved in the work of Humanists International other than through your national or local humanist organization. So as I mentioned, in the US, the big members we have is AHA, American Atheists, and American Ethical Union. So I would encourage you to check out their websites to get involved with them. You can, if you want to check out some of our research or publications, you can go onto our website, humanists.international. You can even, if you want, chuck us some money. You can sign up to email alerts. But the best way, I think, for us as a global community is to, like I say, to think global, act local, get involved in your local community. You can do things like these Zoom calls, invite somebody from the Nigerian Humanist Association or the Taiwan Humanist Association, etc., and to start to build up our global awareness and our global empathy. And I think one of the things that I've been very taken with in this job is just how much of a global community that we are, how similar we all are, how similar we think, and how the problems and the issues that seem to occupy humanists and atheists in the US are often the same in every country around the world. So that's me finished my little presentation. I'm happy to have any questions if anybody wants to ask any.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was really, really well done, and I learned a lot. And I do have a couple of questions, and I can, of course, if you're on the Zoom side of things, feel free to post a question in the chat or use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. For those of you on Facebook, please feel free to post a question in the chat on Facebook as well. I was wondering, when you successfully secure the release of someone that's being held as a prisoner of conscience, what usually is the thing that makes it work? Is it just like the pressure that you've been applying via your partners and it finally just works and you're not quite sure why it works? Or Are there certain points that you reach that you know that if you get to that point, it'll probably work?
That's a really good question. The answer, I think, is not going to be as good as your question, I'm afraid. But the answer is, when I think about the kind of diplomatic efforts that we get involved in, it's often, if you think of it as like a black box, you know the way they talk about Google's algorithm being like a black box, you know, they put inputs in and something comes out, but nobody quite knows what happens in between. That's the way I think about it, because basically, as I said, our main activity is keep our briefing up to date, be as up to date and authoritative as we can, and send that information to the relevant people. What they do when they get it is a little bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
We know, I know through some of our contacts that, let's take an example, somebody, and well, let's just keep it general, but I know that when we've had a case of someone being detained in a specific country, many states, and these would be, for example, European states, the US government, will get together and network and talk about the case. They might then make a joint approach to the national authorities there. They might actually get in touch with our member, the Humanist Association in that country, or they might publish, like I showed you, some like statements on the issue. But we don't really know what actually will happen. In the cases where we've been successful, and perhaps to make the presentation less depressing, I should have used some of the successful examples, but in the cases where we've been successful, basically it seems to go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly, you know. So the case I can think of is Mohammed Sheikh Makater, who is a person who was detained in Mauritania for years and years. We were the first NGO to ever raise this. We managed to convince, you know, some other large NGOs that have much than us to take on his case. And eventually last year, there was a change of presidents, and he was giving it. And for us to be going to meet him in Paris and get him a hotel room, and it's kind of, you know, a very emotional time, and you know, it seems strange when it gets resolved. It seems like it just all happens at once. But I don't know too much about diplomacy, but I know that I mean, I can't underestimate how much of a part of the US government and, for example, like a Dutch region, these government partners are essential for helping us with, and I think for many criticisms that you guys might have of, you know, US government policy, I think one of the things the US government has always been clear on foreign policy issues is that freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of speech is paramount. So that's always a big ally.
Yeah, here, because yeah, as you can imagine, we are sometimes a little depressed about there's and you know, your observation about Sam Brown was really interesting to me. My friend Jeff Charlotte wrote that book, The Family, and he, you know, speaks quite a bit about Sam Brownback and even some of his foreign policy influence when he was a senator from Kansas. So it's good to know that they're also speaking up for people who have no faith. I wondered also if you could tell us anything about the situation in Bangladesh. I know a number of years ago, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it seemed like every story about someone being arrested or unfortunately murdered for their views was coming out of Bangladesh. Has anything changed there, or is it a little easier for folks there, or are we just not hearing it as much?
You're right. There was sort of 2013, 14, 15. There was this awful series of coordinated attacks across Bangladesh on humanist and atheist bloggers, you know, publishing houses, etc. And this all came from a list. You know, that there was actually a list of names that fundamentalist Islamist groups had been putting together and publishing in the hopes that people would do what they did, which is they would take one of these names, they would find the person's publishing house, and they would run through the street with a machete and kill them. And I don't know if you know Bonya Ahmed. She's
I don't believe so.
okay. She does a lot of work, I think, with FFRF and some groups in the US. She's a US Bangladeshi citizen, and her husband was one of those that was murdered in the street, by these Islamist fundamentalists. And
Wow.
there's actually a photo. If you Bonya, Bonya Ahmed, Ahmed, there's actually a photograph you can see of her. So she, for example, she attends, like Congressional Free Thought Caucus meetings and stuff like that. She's quite engaged with Secular Coalition for America. But to kind of show you the kind of clashing of two worlds, there's a photograph you can see of her on Google, which is her standing next to her husband after she'd just been attacked, and it's kind of galling, and I think so the situation now seems to be better, and actually the person who is our Humanists at Risk coordinator used to work for PEN, PEN, which is a writers charity. And
very much familiar.
Yeah. She used to work for PEN International, and they ran a Writers at Risk program, which actually did a lot of work to help relocate a lot of the bloggers. I'm not so good with names, but I know that there are a number of bloggers who've since relocated to Europe and North America and continuing to write blogs and stuff like critical of the authorities in Bangladesh. I can't say too much about what the situation is like in Bangladesh, and to be crude, I don't know whether it's a case that people are keeping their mouths shut more or whether it's a safer place to be, but there doesn't seem to be as many referrals and requests for support coming from Bangladesh as there was back in 2013. But yeah, it was a very, very scary time. That was before I worked at Humanists International, but it was kind of, I think when I became aware of it, and very often you get this disconnect with things that happen far away, where you think, oh, that sounds dreadful, Bangladesh must be a crazy place. But then when you meet someone like Bonya Ahmed, and I've since met other bloggers from Bangladesh, a guy called Prithu Sanyal. Actually, we invited him to the European Parliament to speak at a conference. And, I just can't stress how much these people are the same as you and me. It goes without saying, but how much of a similar worldview we have, it's just obviously a global community, which can hit hard,
Right. Yeah, I was just Googling Bonya Ahmed while you were talking, and I had not sort of had her name in my memory, but I do remember her husband, Avijit Roy, when he was killed. I do remember that story. And well, it's an interesting line of work, because you're doing all this effort and you don't really see necessarily always like the outcome.
Yes.
It must feel a little desperate at times. And I know, like, even just as a listener on this end, I'm sure you have people all the time say to you, like, what can I do to help? And as you said a moment ago, there's not a lot of tangible stuff except for raising awareness and sending emails and tweets and so forth, and money, of course. So
yeah.
But just really, really happy to hear, from you and an update. And I hope that everyone, myself included, those that are listening, will stay in touch with Humanists International. It's obviously free to subscribe to the email. You'll get updates, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And looking forward to your reports. I think it's such valuable work that you're doing, and we're just really grateful for the opportunity to hear from you today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. Well,
I'm sorry it wasn't. I'll do a more cheerful presentation next time if you have me back.
Well, some truths aren't very cheerful.
No, that's true.
But yeah, we really, if we were religious folks, we could, pray for the well-being of our brothers and sisters out there. But in the absence of that, we'll continue to support your work and just keep these in the front of our minds. It must be such a harrowing and terrifying experience to be imprisoned and then also cut from contact with the people that keep you. And we look forward to Mubarak's release and those of the other individuals that you're working for. So yeah, until next time, keep keep up the fight, and we'll look forward to your future updates.
Thank you.